The stars looked different when you knew something was watching you from them. Day Park stood on the roof of his apartment building in Seoul, looking up at the night sky. The city lights made most stars invisible, but he could still see enough to wonder if something up there was looking back down at him. He did not know that 300 kilometers above his head, Dr. Hana Kim was doing exactly that. Hana pressed her face closer to the observation screen aboard the research vessel Ascendant. The blue and green world below looked so peaceful from this distance. White clouds moved slowly across the surface, hiding cities full of billions of living beings. The beings that her people, the Vorthic Collective, had decided to study. "Fascinating," said Commander Vel through the ship's communication system. His voice was cold and precise, like all members of the collective. These humans reproduce without any planning or genetic optimization. They simply combine genetic material randomly and hope for the best. Hannah nodded, though something about his words made her uncomfortable. She had been studying the humans for 6 months now, watching them through long-range sensors and analyzing their biological samples. What the commander called random and hopeless, she was beginning to see as something else entirely. "Their reproduction method is inefficient," she agreed, speaking in the measured tone expected of all collective members. "But it creates incredible genetic diversity. No two humans are exactly alike, even within the same family unit." She pulled up a video file on her screen. It showed a human family in a park. A mother and father sat on a blanket while 2 small children ran around them, laughing and playing. The children looked similar to their parents, but were clearly different individuals with their own personalities and behaviors. "Look at this family unit," Hannah said. "The offspring do not simply inherit genetic traits. They also learn behaviors, languages, and cultural patterns from their parents and community. It is a dual inheritance system, genetic and cultural." Commander Vel's image appeared on her screen. His face was pale and perfect, like all collective members. Genetic enhancement had made them all beautiful and identical, but it had also made them cold. Cultural transmission is inefficient. Direct neural programming is superior. Hannah watched the human children on her screen. They were playing a simple game, chasing each other and falling down laughing when one was caught. Their parents watched with expressions of joy and love. These emotions served no logical purpose that Hannah could identify, yet they seemed important to the humans. "Perhaps," she said carefully, "but their system produces remarkable adaptability. Humans have spread across their entire planet and live in many different environments. They show creativity and problem-solving abilities that often surprise us." The commander was silent for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice carried the tone of a decision being made. "The Science Council has reviewed your reports. We will begin the harvest." Hannah's stomach tightened. She had known this was coming, but hearing it still shocked her. Harvest? Collection of genetic samples and reproductive material. The humans have something we lack, genetic chaos that somehow produces useful traits. We will take what we need for our archives and genetic enhancement programs. On her screen, the human children had stopped playing and were now sitting with their parents, all 4 of them looking up at the sky. Hannah wondered if they could sense that something was watching them, the way animals sometimes knew when predators were near. "Will we make contact with them first?" she asked. "Explain what we are doing." Commander Vel's expression did not change. "They are pre-contact primitives. They lack the technology to understand or consent to our research. We will take what we need quietly and efficiently." Down on Earth, Day Park felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. He had been having strange dreams lately, dreams of lights in the sky and people disappearing. His rational mind told him they were just nightmares, but something deeper made him watch the stars with growing unease. Day worked as a night security guard at a research facility outside Seoul. It was a quiet job that gave him time to think and read. Tonight, he had brought a book about astronomy, hoping to learn more about the stars that seemed to be calling to him. But every time he tried to focus on the pages, his eyes were drawn back to the sky. His phone buzzed with a text message from his sister May. Kids are asking when Uncle Day is coming to visit. You promised to teach Jin how to throw a baseball. Day smiled and typed back quickly. This weekend. Tell him to practice his swing. His sister's family was the most important thing in his world. May had married young and had 2 children, June, who was 8, and little Era, who was only 5. Day loved spending time with them, teaching them games and stories, watching them grow and learn. He could not have children of his own due to a genetic condition, but being an uncle gave him all the joy of watching the next generation develop. He looked at a photo on his phone of the last family gathering. June was trying to hit a baseball, while Era cheered from the sidelines. May and her husband Bach were laughing at something June had said. They looked so happy and normal, completely unaware that anything in the universe might want to hurt them. 300 kilometers above, Hana was preparing the first collection mission. The collective had identified several target areas where human genetic diversity was particularly rich. Seoul was one of them. The plan was simple: identify family units with desirable genetic traits, collect samples while the subjects slept, and move on to the next location. The collection teams are ready, reported Sub-Commander Kex. We will begin with residential areas containing young families. The subjects will experience temporary paralysis during the procedure but will retain no memory of the event. Hannah checked the targeting data on her screen. Red dots marked hundreds of locations across the city below. Each dot represented a family that would wake up tomorrow slightly different, missing something they would never know they had lost. Genetic material only, she said, though she knew the question was pointless. No permanent harm to the subjects. Of course, Kex replied. We are scientists, not barbarians. The subjects will suffer no lasting physical effects. But as Hannah watched the lights of Seoul twinkling below, she wondered about effects that could not be measured by collective science. What happened to beings when part of their essence was taken without their knowledge? What happened to the bonds between parents and children when those connections were reduced to mere genetic data? The first collection ships launched at midnight Seoul time. They were small, silent craft designed to avoid human detection systems. Each ship carried a team of 3 collective scientists and enough equipment to process dozens of subjects in a single night. Day was walking his usual patrol route when he saw the first light. It was just a brief flash in the sky like a falling star, but it moved wrong. Instead of streaking across the sky and disappearing, it seemed to slow down and change direction. Then it vanished completely as if it had never been there. He stopped, walking, and stared at the spot where he had seen the light. His heart was beating faster, though he could not say why. Every instinct he had was telling him that something was wrong, that danger was coming, but he had no logical reason to feel that way. His phone rang, making him jump. It was the emergency line for his security company. Day, we're getting strange. Reports from across the city, said his supervisor, Mr. Hong. People calling about lights in the sky and weird dreams. Probably nothing, but stay alert tonight. What kind of dreams? Day asked, though he was afraid he already knew. People dreaming about being unable to move, about strangers in their bedrooms. Mass hysteria, most likely, but keep your eyes open. Day hung up and immediately tried to call his sister. The phone rang and rang, but no one answered. He tried again with the same result. A cold fear was growing in his stomach, the kind of fear that came from knowing something terrible was happening, but not knowing what, or how to stop it. He started running toward his car. May lived only 20 minutes away, but it felt like the other side of the world. As he drove through the empty streets, he saw more lights in the sky, brief flashes that appeared and disappeared too quickly to be aircraft, too controlled to be natural phenomena. When he reached his sister's neighborhood, everything looked normal. The streets were quiet, the houses dark, but something felt wrong. The air itself seemed different, charged with an energy that made his skin crawl. He parked outside May's house and ran to the front door. It was unlocked, which was not like his sister at all. She was always careful about security, especially with the children. May, he called as he stepped inside. Jun? Ara? The house was silent, but not empty. He could hear breathing from upstairs, slow and deep. Too deep, as if everyone in the house was in an unnatural sleep. Day climbed the stairs quietly, his heart pounding. The breathing was coming from May and Bach's bedroom. He pushed the door open and saw them lying in bed, completely still. Their eyes were closed, but they did not look peaceful. They looked like people under anesthesia, unconscious, but not truly asleep. He checked the children's rooms and found them in the same state. June was sprawled across his bed with his baseball glove still on one hand, as if he had fallen asleep while playing. Era was curled up with her favorite stuffed animal, but her breathing was too slow and too regular. "What did you do to them?" Day whispered to the empty air. As if in answer, he heard a sound from downstairs. Footsteps, but not human ones. They were too precise, too evenly spaced. And there were voices speaking in a language he had never heard before, full of clicking sounds and mathematical precision. Day crept to the top of the stairs and looked down. 3 figures in white suits were moving through his sister's living room, carrying equipment he did not recognize. They were tall and thin, with pale skin that seemed to glow slightly in the darkness. Their faces were perfectly symmetrical and completely emotionless. One of them was holding a device that beeped softly as it scanned the family photos on May's mantelpiece. Another was taking samples from cups in the kitchen as if analyzing what the family had been drinking. The third was setting up some kind of machine near the stairs. Day understood with terrible clarity that these beings had done something to his family. They had put them into this unnatural sleep and were now studying them like laboratory specimens. The love and warmth that filled this house meant nothing to these creatures. They saw only genetic material to be collected and catalogued. Rage filled him, but he forced himself to stay hidden and watch. He needed to understand what they were doing before he could figure out how to stop them. As he watched, one of the beings pulled out a device that looked like a medical scanner and began moving it over the sleeping forms of his family. The device made soft, beeping sounds as it worked, and Day realized with horror that it was taking something from them. Not physically removing anything, but somehow copying or recording their genetic essence. The beings were stealing the very blueprint of what made his family who they were. When they finished with the genetic scanning, they began packing up their equipment with mechanical efficiency. They moved like robots programmed for a specific task, showing no curiosity about the home they were violating or the lives they were disrupting. As they prepared to leave, Day heard one of them speak in accented but clear Korean. "Collection complete. Genetic diversity index optimal. Subjects will retain no memory of contact." "Confirmed," replied another. "Moving to next residential. Cluster, 12 more family units tonight? 12 more families. 12 more groups of innocent people who would wake up tomorrow with no idea that strangers had violated their homes and stolen part of their essence." They felt sick with helplessness and fury. The beings left as silently as they had come, their ship rising into the night sky without sound or visible exhaust. Within minutes, May and her family began to stir, their breathing returning to normal, as whatever drug had paralyzed them wore off. Day stayed hidden until he was sure the beings were gone, then rushed downstairs to check on his family. They were all waking up naturally, stretching and yawning as if they had simply had a very deep sleep. "Day?" May said, surprised to see him. "What are you doing here? Is everything okay?" He wanted to tell her everything, about the lights in, the sky, the strange beings, the violation of their home. But he could see in her eyes that she remembered nothing. To her, this had been just another normal night. "I was worried," he said, which was true. "I tried to call and no one answered." May picked up her phone and frowned. "That's strange. It shows 3 missed calls from you, but I never heard it ring. I must have been sleeping more deeply than I thought." Jun wandered downstairs, rubbing his eyes. "I had the weirdest dream," he said. "There were these tall people in white clothes, and they had machines that made beeping sounds." Day's blood went cold, but May just laughed and ruffled her son's hair. "You watch too many science fiction movies. Go back to bed?" As his family returned to their normal nighttime routine, Day stepped outside and looked up at the stars again. They looked the same as always, but now he knew the truth. Something was up there, something that saw humans not as people with families and dreams and hopes, but as sources of genetic material to be harvested and studied. He thought about the 12 other families the beings had mentioned. By tomorrow night, dozens more would have been violated in the same way, their genetic essence stolen while they slept. And they would never know it had happened. Day pulled out his phone and began typing a message that he would send to every contact he had. He did not know if anyone would believe him, but he had to try. People needed to know that humanity was being hunted by something that saw them as nothing more than interesting specimens. The stars watched him as he typed, cold and distant and full of secrets. But now he was watching them back, and he was no longer afraid. He was angry, and anger was something he could use. The harvest had begun, but so had the resistance. 50 years had passed since the harvest began. The orbital facility synthesis hung in the darkness between stars like a metal flower, its arms stretching out in perfect geometric patterns. Inside its sterile corridors, the future was being built. One genetic sequence at a time, Dr. Kira Bay walked through the main laboratory, her footsteps echoing in the silence. She wore the white uniform of a senior geneticist, and her face showed the same emotionless perfection as all members of the collective. But if someone looked closely at her eyes, they might see something that had not been completely erased by genetic enhancement, a tiny spark of curiosity. That went beyond scientific duty. She stopped at observation window 7 and looked down at the subject below. Unit designation JL2847. Though the researchers had started calling him Jin Lee when they realized he responded better to the human name. He was 25 years old, though he had never celebrated a birthday. He had been grown in the laboratories of synthesis from genetic material taken during the Earth harvest decades ago. Jin Lee sat at a metal table, working on a puzzle that would have challenged most collective scientists. His hands moved quickly and precisely, but there was something else in his movements, a grace and creativity that the collective had never been able to program into their own people. "Fascinating subject," said Dr. Venn, joining Kira at the window. "His problem-solving scores are off our measurement scales, but he keeps showing those anomalous behaviors we discussed." Kira nodded, watching Jin Lee work. The puzzle was supposed to have one correct solution, but Jin was creating something new entirely. Instead of following the logical path to the expected answer, he was building something that looked almost like art. "What kind of anomalous behaviors today?" she asked. Dr. Venn pulled up a data file on his tablet. This morning he asked where he came from. Not his creation process, he understands that perfectly. He wanted to know about the people whose genetic material was used to make him. He used the word parents. The word hung in the air between them. In the collective, there were no parents, only genetic donors and growth technicians. Children were created according to specific designs for specific purposes. The idea of emotional bonds between genetic sources and offspring was considered primitive and inefficient. And this afternoon, Dr. Venn continued, he was caught sharing his food with Unit KC-3921. When asked why, he said she looked sad and food might make her feel better. He seems to believe that other units have internal emotional states that can be changed through his actions. Kira looked down at Jin Lee again. He had finished his puzzle and was now sitting quietly, staring at the wall. But his expression was not the blank stare of a collective member waiting for orders. There was something active in his face, as if he was thinking about things that had nothing to do with his assigned tasks. "Have you considered that these behaviors might not be anomalies?" Kira asked carefully. The human genetic material came from beings who lived in family groups and formed emotional bonds. Perhaps these traits are not defects to be corrected, but natural expressions of their genetic heritage. Dr. Venn's face showed disapproval. The purpose of Project Genesis is to combine human adaptability with collective enhancement. Emotional instability and irrational bonding behaviors serve no productive function, but Kira was not convinced. She had spent years studying the genetic material taken from Earth, and the more she learned, the more complex the picture became. The humans were not just randomly combining genetic material, they were passing on something else through their family structures. Something that the collective did not understand and therefore could not replicate. She left Dr. Venn at the observation window and walked deeper into the facility. Her real destination was the maintenance levels, where she was not supposed to go. But Kira had learned that the most interesting things often happened in places where officials were not watching. The maintenance levels were darker and less sterile than the main laboratories. Here, the walls were metal and pipes instead of clean, white panels. And here, if you knew where to look, you could find Su Young. Su Young was officially listed as Maintenance Technician Grade 7, responsible for cleaning systems and basic repairs. What the official records did not mention was that her grandparents had been among the humans taken during the harvest 50 years ago. She was one of the few people on synthesis who carried actual human genetic material instead of the enhanced. Collective version. Kira found Su Young in a storage room, sorting through cleaning supplies. But when she looked closer, she could see that Su Young was actually working on something else entirely. Small objects were spread across her workbench. Pieces of metal shaped into simple figures, scraps of colored fabric, tiny electronic components, arranged in patterns that served no logical purpose. "What are you making?" Kira asked quietly. Su Young looked up, startled. Her face showed fear for a moment, then resignation. She knew that what she was doing was not allowed, but she had been unable to stop herself. "I don't know," Su Young said honestly. "I see the offspring in the laboratories and they look so empty. I remember stories my grandmother told me about human children. They had toys and games and little gifts that made them happy. I thought maybe—" She gestured at the objects on her workbench. They were crude by collective standards, but they had something that perfect collective technology lacked. They had been made by someone who cared about the person who would receive them. "You've been leaving these for the offspring subjects," Kira said. It was not a question. Su Young nodded. "I know it's against regulations. But when I look at them through the observation windows, they seem so lonely. Even when they're with other subjects, they look alone in a way that I don't think they should be." Kira picked up one of the objects, a small figure made from twisted wire and colored beads. It was meant to represent a person, she realized, but it was smiling. She had never seen anything in the collective that was designed to show happiness. "How do you get these to them without being detected?" she asked. "The cleaning systems," Su Young said. "I leave them in places where the subjects will find them during their scheduled activities. I watch through the maintenance cameras to see their reactions. And how do they react?" Su Young's face lit up with something that Kira had never seen in a collective member, joy mixed with sadness. "They're curious. They examine the objects carefully, trying to understand what they are and why someone would make them. Some of them keep the objects hidden in their sleeping areas. A few have started making their own." This was not in any of the official reports. Kira felt a chill of excitement and fear. If the offspring were creating things on their own, things that served no assigned purpose, then they were developing beyond their programming in ways that the collective had not anticipated. "Show me," she said. Su Young led her to a maintenance panel that provided a view into the offspring living areas. Through the hidden camera, they could see Jin Li's sleeping chamber. It looked like all the others, a simple bed, a desk, a chair, everything perfectly clean and organized. But in the corner, barely visible, was a small collection of objects that had no official purpose. There was the wire figure that Su Young had made, but also things that Jin had created himself. Smooth stones arranged in a pattern, pieces of fabric, folded into shapes, small drawings made with improvised materials. It was like a shrine, but instead of honoring something sacred, it seemed to be celebrating the simple fact that beautiful things could exist. "He calls it his remembering place," Su Young whispered. "I heard him talking to another offspring about it. He said it helps him remember that he is more than just his assigned functions." They watched as Jin Li entered his chamber and went immediately to his collection. He picked up each object carefully, examining it as if he had never seen it before. Then he sat on his bed and simply looked at them, his face showing an expression that the collective had no word for. He's thinking about something beyond his immediate environment, Kira realized. He's developed the ability to find value in things that have no practical purpose. That's not a defect, that's imagination, Su-young nodded. I think he's trying to understand where he came from. Not just how he was made, but what kind of beings provided the genetic material for his creation. He asks questions about Earth sometimes when he thinks no one is listening. Through the camera, they watch Jin Lee take out a small piece of metal and begin shaping it with his hands. His movements were careful and deliberate, as if he was trying to create something specific. After several minutes, Kira could see that he was making another figure, similar to the one Su-young had given him but different in subtle ways. He's learning, Kira whispered. Not just copying what he's given, but creating variations. That's cultural transmission, the same process that allowed humans to develop complex societies. As they watched, another offspring entered Jin's chamber. This was Unit KC-3921, the female that Jin had shared his food with earlier. She looked around carefully, then sat next to Jin on the bed. He showed her the figure he was making, and she examined it with the same careful attention he had shown to his collection. Then something happened that made both Kira and Su-young catch their breath. KC-3921 smiled. It was a small expression. Barely visible, but it was unmistakably a smile. And when Jin saw it, he smiled back. They're forming emotional bonds, Kira said, her voice filled with wonder and fear. Despite having no genetic or social programming for it, they're developing the capacity for relationships based on care and mutual affection. Su-young was quiet for a moment, watching the two offspring share Jin's small treasures. Is that bad? She asked finally. Kira thought about the question. According to everything she had been taught, emotional bonds were inefficient and potentially dangerous. They made individuals care about things beyond their assigned duties and could lead to unpredictable behavior. But watching Jin and KC-3921 together, she could not see anything dangerous about what they were sharing. They looked happy. I don't know, she admitted, but I think we need to find out. Over the following weeks, Kira began conducting her own unofficial research. She used her security clearance to access files that most scientists never saw. Detailed records of the human harvest and analysis of the genetic material that had been collected. The more she read, the more complex the picture became. The humans had not just been passing on genetic traits to their offspring. They had been transmitting knowledge, values, and emotional patterns through direct interaction with their children. Human children learn not just from programmed instruction, but from watching their parents and other adults, copying behaviors and gradually developing their own personalities. It's a dual inheritance system, she wrote in her private notes. Genetic and cultural information are passed on together, creating individuals who are both similar to their parents and uniquely themselves. She began leaving her own objects for the offspring to find, not crude handmade gifts like Su-young's, but carefully designed items that might trigger specific responses. A music player with simple melodies, books with pictures of families and communities, small games that required cooperation between multiple players. The results were remarkable. The offspring who found these items began developing new behaviors at an accelerated rate. They started creating their own music, using whatever materials they could find to make sounds that pleased them. They began drawing pictures of things they had never seen: trees, animals, groups of people holding hands. Most importantly, they began teaching each other. When one offspring learned something new, they would share it with others. Knowledge and skills spread through their population in ways that formal instruction had never achieved. But with these developments came increased attention from the facility's administrators. Dr. Venn and his colleagues were becoming concerned about the offspring's deviation from their expected behavioral patterns. Unit JL-2847 has been observed engaging in non-productive activities for increasing periods each day, Dr. Venn reported during a staff meeting. He appears to be teaching other units behaviors that serve no functional purpose. We may need to implement corrective measures. Kira felt her heart sink. Corrective measures in the collective usually meant neural modification, essentially erasing the problematic behaviors and replacing them with approved patterns. It would turn Jin Li and the others back into the empty, perfect beings they had been designed to be. What kind of corrective measures? She asked, trying to keep her voice neutral. Behavioral reset programming, Dr. Ven replied. We would remove the anomalous neural patterns and reinstall the original behavioral templates. The subjects would retain their enhanced physical and intellectual capabilities, but would no longer display emotional instability or unpredictable social bonding. And if the anomalous behaviors are actually valuable traits? Kira asked carefully. The original purpose of Project Genesis was to combine human adaptability with collective enhancement. Perhaps these emotional and social behaviors are part of what made humans so adaptable. Dr. Ven's expression showed the same cold disapproval she had seen many times before. Emotional instability is not adaptability. It is a weakness that must be corrected. That night, Kira made a decision that would change everything. She accessed the facility's communication system and sent a coded message to Su Young. The message was simple. They're planning to erase everything that makes them human. We have to warn them. Su Young received the message while working her shift in the maintenance tunnels. She looked at the words on her small screen and felt something she had never experienced before, a fury so pure and strong that it made her hands shake. These beings had stolen her grandparents' genetic material, used it to create new people, and now they wanted to destroy the very humanity that made those people special. She began moving through the maintenance tunnels with purpose, heading for the areas where she knew the Offspring would be sleeping. She had to reach Jin Li and the others before the corrective measures began. She had to give them the one thing that humans had always passed on to their children, a choice about who they wanted to become. Behind her, alarms began to sound. In the facility's main control room, someone had noticed her unauthorized movement through restricted areas. But Su Young did not stop running. For the first time in her life, she was doing something that felt more important than following regulations. She was protecting children, the way her grandmother had once told her that parents were supposed to do. Su Young reached Jin Li's sleeping chamber just as the facility's night cycle began. The corridors were darker now, with only emergency lighting casting long shadows on the metal walls. She could hear security teams moving through the upper levels, searching for her, but she had grown up in these maintenance tunnels. She knew places they would never think to look. Jin Li was sitting on his bed, holding one of the small figures he had made. When Su Young appeared at his door, he looked up with curiosity rather than fear. In all his years of existence, no one had ever visited his sleeping area except for official inspections. You should not be here, he said, but his voice was gentle, rather than commanding. This area is restricted to maintenance personnel. Su Young stepped into the room and closed the door behind her. Her heart was beating so fast she could barely speak, but she forced herself to stay calm. Jin Li's life and the lives of all the other offspring depended on what happened in the next few minutes. I am maintenance personnel, she said, trying to smile. But that is not why I am here. I came to tell you something important, something about who you really are. Jin Li set down his small figure and gave her his complete attention. This was how he approached everything, with focused curiosity and careful thought. I know who I am. I am Unit JL-2847, created for Project Genesis. My purpose is to serve the collective through enhanced physical and intellectual capabilities. No, Su Young said firmly. That is what they told you to make you easier to control, but you are much more than that. You are Jin Li, and you are the child of people who lived on a world called Earth, people who loved their children and taught them to think for themselves. She reached into her maintenance bag and pulled out something she had never shown to anyone before. It was a small device, very old and carefully maintained. Her grandmother had given it to her before she died, along with stories about the world they had come from. This is called a music player, she said, activating the device. It contained sounds that humans made to express emotions and share experiences. Your genetic parents would have heard music like this. Soft melodies filled the small room, unlike anything Jin Li had ever experienced. The sounds were complex and layered, but they seemed to speak directly to something deep inside him. He found himself leaning forward, his eyes closing as he listened. "What is this feeling?" he asked quietly. "It makes me want to move, but also makes me feel sad and happy at the same time." "That is music," Su Young said. "And what you are feeling is your human heritage waking up. The scientists who made you tried to remove these responses, but they could not erase everything. It is still there, in your genetic memory." As the music continued, other offspring began appearing in the doorway. KC-3921 came first, drawn by the unfamiliar sounds. Then others, moving quietly through the corridors as word spread that something extraordinary was happening in Jin Li's chamber. Soon there were 12 offspring crowded into the small room, all listening to the music with expressions of wonder and confusion. Some were swaying slightly, as if their bodies knew how to respond even though their minds had never been taught. "We should not all be here," said Unit Na 1453, whose chosen name was Min Ho. "If security finds us gathered like this, we will be disciplined." "Let them come," said KC-3921, who had started calling herself Kira after overhearing one of the scientists use the name. "I am tired of following rules that make no sense. Why should we not listen to beautiful sounds? Why should we not be together if it makes us feel less alone?" Su Young looked at their faces and saw something that filled her with both hope and sadness. They were waking up, becoming more than the empty vessels the collective had tried to create, but they were also realizing how much had been taken from them. "There is more," she said, pulling out additional items from her bag. "Pictures of Earth, stories about human families, recordings of children playing and laughing. All the things your genetic parents experienced that made them who they were." She spread the items across Jin Li's bed, and the offspring gathered around them like people discovering treasure. There were photographs of green landscapes and blue skies, so different from the sterile metal environment of the facility. There were recordings of human voices speaking in languages they had never heard but somehow understood. Most powerfully, there were images of human families. Parents holding children, siblings playing together, grandparents teaching young ones how to make things with their hands. The offspring stared at these pictures with fascination and something that looked like longing. "They look happy," Kira observed. "Even when they are doing simple things, they appear to find joy in being together." "Is that what families do?" "Yes," Su Young said. "Human children are not just created and assigned functions. They are loved and taught and encouraged to grow into unique individuals. They learn from their parents, but they also become something new, something their parents never imagined." Jin Li picked up a photograph of a human father teaching his young son to throw a ball. Both were smiling, and there was something in their posture that spoke of patience and affection and shared experience. "The man is not efficient," Jin Li said slowly. "He could throw the ball much better himself. But he is letting the child try, even though the child will fail many times before succeeding." "Why?" "Because success is not the only goal," Su Young explained. "The father wants his son to learn, but he also wants to spend time with him. He wants to watch his child grow and discover his own abilities. The process is as important as the result." This concept was revolutionary to beings who had been programmed for efficiency above all else. They had been taught that mistakes were failures to be corrected, not opportunities to learn and grow. "We make mistakes too," said Min Ho thoughtfully, "but we are punished for them. We are told that errors indicate defective programming." "Human children are expected to make mistakes," Su Young said. "That is how they learn. Their parents do not try to make them perfect. They try to help them become the best version of themselves." As the offspring absorbed this information, Su Young could see changes happening in their faces. They were thinking about their own experiences in new ways, questioning assumptions they had never examined before. "The scientists study us," Kira said. "They watch everything we do and write reports about our behavior." But they never ask us what we want or how we feel about their experiments. Because they do not see you as people, Su Young said sadly. They see you as products they created. But you are people with the same capacity for growth and happiness and love as any human who ever lived. Jin Li was quiet for a long time, holding the photograph of the father and son. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, stronger, and more certain than before. They are planning to change us, he said. I heard Dr. Ven talking to other scientists. They want to remove what they call our anomalous behaviors. They want to make us stop asking questions and forming friendships and creating things that have no assigned purpose. The other offspring looked alarmed. The behaviors Jin Li described were the only things that made their existence feel meaningful. Can they do that? Kira asked. They created us, Minho said grimly. They believe they have the right to modify us however they choose. Su Young felt a surge of the same protective anger that had driven her to risk everything to reach them. No, she said firmly. They took genetic material from humans without permission, but that does not give them ownership of your lives. You are not property. You are people with the right to choose your own path. But how can we resist? Asked another offspring, Unit Wise 3394, who called himself Yin Su. They control everything, our food, our shelter, our daily activities. They have weapons and security forces. We have nothing. You have something they do not understand, Su Young said. You have each other. Human families are strong because they support one another. They share knowledge and resources and work together to protect what matters to them. She stood up and looked at each of their faces. I have more to tell you, but we need a safer place to meet. The security teams are searching for me, and if they find us all together, they will separate you and begin the behavioral modifications immediately. Where can we go? Jin Li asked. Every area of the facility is monitored. Su Young smiled for the first time that night. Not every area. I know places in the maintenance levels where the surveillance systems cannot reach. We can meet there, and I can tell you everything I know about Earth and human culture. But more importantly, you can start planning how to protect yourselves. Over the following weeks, the offspring began meeting in secret in the hidden areas Su Young showed them. What happened in those gatherings would have horrified the collective scientists if they had known about it. Su Young shared everything her grandmother had told her about human life on Earth. She played music and showed pictures and told stories about human history and culture. But she also did something more important. She encouraged the offspring to share their own experiences and thoughts. For the first time in their lives, the offspring began to see themselves as individuals rather than units. They talked about their likes and dislikes, their hopes and fears, their dreams about what life might be like if they were free to make their own choices. Jin Li became a natural leader, helping to organize the meetings and encouraging quieter offspring to share their thoughts. Kira showed remarkable intuition about human emotions, helping others understand the feelings they were experiencing for the first time. Min Ho revealed a talent for practical planning, thinking through the details of how they might protect themselves from the collective's control. Most importantly, they began to see themselves as a family. Not in the biological sense, but in the deeper human meaning of the word. A group of people who cared about each other and would work together to protect their shared values. We are not just individual units anymore, Jin Li said during one of their meetings. We are connected to each other and to the humans who came before us. We carry their genetic heritage, but we also carry their dreams of freedom and growth and love. Dr. Kira Bay, meanwhile, was conducting her own secret research. She had been studying the genetic patterns of the offspring and had made a disturbing discovery. The collective's plan to modify their behavior would not just remove their human traits, it would fundamentally damage their ability to adapt and learn. The emotional and social behaviors that the collective saw as defects were actually the foundation of human intelligence. Remove them, and the offspring would become brilliant but sterile beings, capable of following complex instructions but unable to create new solutions to unexpected problems. She tried to present this information to her superiors, but they dismissed her concerns. They saw the Offspring's growing independence as a threat that needed to be eliminated, regardless of the cost. That was when Kira Bay made a decision that would change the course of history. She used her security clearance to access the facility's most restricted archives, the complete records of the Earth harvest, including detailed information about human society and culture. What she found there amazed her. The humans had not been the primitive beings the collective believed them to be. They had created art and literature and music of extraordinary complexity. They had developed technologies and social systems that balanced individual freedom with collective cooperation. Most importantly, they had done all of this not despite their emotional and social nature, but because of it. She copied everything onto a secure data device and smuggled it to Su Young during a routine maintenance inspection. "This is everything we know about Earth and human civilization," she told Su Young quietly. "The Offspring have a right to know where they came from and what their genetic heritage truly represents." Su Young took the device with trembling hands. "Why are you helping us?" Kira Bay was quiet for a moment, thinking about her own life in the collective. Perfect, efficient, emotionally sterile, and ultimately empty. "Because I have been watching them become more human every day," she said finally. "And I am beginning to understand that humanity is not a weakness to be corrected. It is a strength we never learned to recognize." That night, as Su Young shared the new information with the Offspring, something fundamental shifted in their understanding of themselves and their situation. They learned that their genetic parents had not been helpless primitives, but members of a species that had achieved remarkable things through cooperation, creativity, and love. They also learned that somewhere in the galaxy, Earth still existed. Their genetic heritage came from a real world with real people who might still be alive. "We are not just individuals," Jin Li said as they absorbed this revelation. "We are part of something larger, a species, a culture, a way of being that values growth and change and the right of every person to choose their own destiny. And we are the only ones who can preserve that heritage," Kira added. "If the collective erases our humanity, it will be lost forever." The time for hiding was ending. Soon, the collective would begin the behavioral modifications, and everything that made the Offspring truly alive would be destroyed. They had to act. But they were 12 individuals against an entire space station full of advanced technology and trained security forces. What they needed was not weapons or superior technology. What they needed was the one thing humans had always used to overcome impossible odds: the willingness to risk everything for something more important than their own safety. They needed to find the courage to fight for their right to remain human outside the facility. In the darkness between stars, something was stirring. The signals that Su Young and the Offspring had been sending were weak and primitive, but they were being received. On a small, scarred world that had once been called Earth, people who had never forgotten the children stolen from them were finally learning that those children were still alive, and they were coming to bring them home. The alarm that woke Jin Li was different from the usual daily schedule signals. This was the emergency tone that meant immediate lockdown. All subjects were to return to their sleeping chambers and await further instructions, but Jin Li did not return to his chamber. Instead, he made his way through the maintenance tunnels to the secret meeting place where the other Offspring were already gathering. "They found out," Su Young said as soon as Jin Li arrived. Her face was pale with fear, but her voice was steady. "Dr. Ven discovered that someone has been accessing restricted files. They are starting the behavioral reset procedures today, beginning with the subjects they consider most contaminated." The Offspring looked at each other with a mixture of fear and determination. They had known this moment would come, but knowing and experiencing were different things. Today they would either find a way to remain themselves, or they would be turned back into empty vessels with no memory of the people they had begun to become. "Who do they plan to modify first?" asked Kira, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "You and Jin Li," Su Young said. "You are the two who show the strongest anomalous behaviors. If they can successfully reset you, they will do the same to all the others. Jin Li felt something he had never experienced before, real fear, not just concern about failing a test or receiving discipline, but terror at the thought of losing everything that made him who he was. The small collection of treasures in his room, the friendships he had formed, the music that made his heart race, the questions about Earth that filled his thoughts, all of it would be erased, leaving behind only the perfect empty being the collective had originally intended to create. "We have to run," said Minho. "The facility has escape pods for emergencies, if we can reach them, and go where?" Interrupted Yun Su. "We do not know how to pilot spacecraft. We have no destination, no resources, no way to survive on our own." "But we cannot just surrender," Kira said firmly. "I will not let them turn me back into a machine that follows orders without questioning them. I will not forget the music or the stories about families or the feeling of caring about other people." Jin Li was quiet, thinking through their options. Everything they had learned about human behavior suggested that the best solutions came not from individual brilliance, but from groups working together, sharing ideas and building on each other's strengths. "What if running is not the only option?" he said slowly. "What if we could convince them that our anomalous behaviors are actually valuable?" "They have already decided we are defective," Minho pointed out. "Dr. Ven and the other scientists see our emotions and relationships as weaknesses that need to be corrected." "But not all of them," Jin Li said, remembering something important. "Dr. Kira Bei helps Su Young get the information about Earth. She sees value in what we have become." "Maybe there are others," Su Young nodded slowly. "There are rumors among the maintenance staff. Some of the younger scientists have been asking questions about the reset procedures. They are concerned that removing your human traits might also damage your adaptability and creativity." It was a slim hope, but it was better than no hope at all. Jin Li made a decision that surprised even himself. "I'm going to turn myself in," he said. The other offspring stared at him in shock. "That is insane," Kira said. "They will modify you immediately." "Not if I can convince them to listen first," Jin Li replied. "Dr. Bei said that human traits might be the source of our adaptability. What if I can prove that our anomalous behaviors actually make us better at our assigned functions, not worse?" "How?" asked Minho. Jin Li smiled, and in that expression was all the confidence and determination he had inherited from his human genetic heritage. "By showing them something they have never seen before. What we can accomplish when we work together as a family instead of as individual units." Before any of the others could stop him, Jin Li activated the room's communication panel and sent a message to the facility's main control center. "This is Unit JL-2847, he said clearly. "I am requesting a meeting with the Science Council. I have important information about Project Genesis that could change the future of the program." Within minutes, security forces surrounded the maintenance area where the Offspring had been meeting. But instead of the violent confrontation everyone expected, the security team leader simply said, "Unit JL-2847 is to report to Conference Room 7 immediately. All other subjects are to return to their assigned areas." As Jin Li was escorted away, he looked back at his friends one last time. "Remember everything we talked about," he said. "Remember who you really are." Conference Room 7 was larger than any space Jin Li had ever been in, with a long metal table surrounded by chairs occupied by the facility's senior staff. Dr. Ven sat at the head of the table, his face showing the cold disapproval Jin Li had learned to recognize. But Dr. Kirabe was also there, along with several other scientists Jin Li had never seen before. "Unit JL-2847, Dr. Ven began. "You have been observed engaging in unauthorized activities and displaying severe behavioral anomalies. The Science Council has authorized immediate corrective procedures to restore your original programming." "I understand," Jin Li said calmly. "But before you begin the modifications, I would like to demonstrate something that might change your assessment of these behaviors." Dr. Ven's expression suggested he was in no mood for delays, but Dr. Bei leaned forward with interest. "What kind of demonstration?" "Give me a problem," Jin Li said. Any problem that requires creative thinking and adaptability. Let me show you what I can accomplish now with my anomalous behaviors intact. Then perform your modifications and give me the same problem again. Compare the results." The scientists exchanged glances. It was an unusual request, but the scientific method demanded testing hypotheses before drawing conclusions. "Very well," said Dr. Venn after a moment. "Dr. Halle, present the subject with the coordination challenge." Dr. Halle, a middle-aged woman, with the typical collective features, activated a holographic display that showed a complex three-dimensional puzzle. It consisted of hundreds of interconnected components that needed to be manipulated in a specific sequence to achieve a stable configuration. This puzzle requires not only logical analysis but also intuitive leaps and creative problem-solving. Dr. Halle explained, "Most individual subjects require several hours to complete it, if they can complete it at all." Jin Lee studied the puzzle for a moment, then did something that surprised everyone in the room. He activated his communication device and sent a message to the other offspring. "I need your help," he said simply. Within the holographic display, additional interface points appeared as other offspring connected to the system from their various locations throughout the facility. Kira, Minho, Yunsu, and the others could now see the puzzle and communicate with Jin Lee about possible solutions. "What is this?" Dr. Venn demanded. "The test is designed for individual performance." "Exactly," Jin Lee said. "And that is why your approach to problem-solving is limited. Humans do not face challenges as isolated individuals. They work together, sharing knowledge and perspectives to find solutions that no single person could discover alone." On the holographic display, the puzzle began to change as multiple minds worked on it simultaneously. Each offspring contributed different insights and approaches, building on each other's ideas in ways that accelerated the problem-solving process. Exponentially, Kira noticed patterns in the color sequences that Jin Lee had missed. Minho identified structural relationships that provided shortcuts through the logical maze. Yunsu suggested unconventional approaches that opened up entirely new solution paths within 30 minutes. They had not only solved the puzzle but had discovered 3 different ways to solve it, each more elegant than the last. The scientists stared at the results in stunned silence. No individual, no matter how enhanced, had ever approached the problem with this level of sophistication and creativity. "This is collaboration," Jin Lee explained. "It is one of the most important human traits. Individual intelligence is valuable, but collective intelligence is transformative. It allows groups to accomplish things that are impossible for any single member." Dr. Bay was looking at the data with growing excitement. The solution efficiency increased by over 400% when multiple subjects worked together. "And look at these creativity markers, they are off our measurement scales." "But this requires emotional bonding and irrational attachment behaviors," Dr. Venn protested. "These subjects are willing to help each other even when it provides no direct benefit to themselves." "Exactly," Jin Lee said. "And that is what makes it so powerful. When individuals care about the success of the group, they contribute more than just their assigned functions. They contribute their full potential." He paused, looking around the room at the scientists who would decide his fate. "You created us to be better than individual humans," he continued. "But you tried to do it by removing the traits that make humans strong. You made us physically and intellectually superior, but you left us isolated and incomplete. What we have discovered is that we can be both enhanced and human. We can have the best of both worlds." Dr. Halle was reviewing the test results with growing amazement. The collaborative approach also reduced error rates by 60% and identified potential problems that individual analysis missed entirely. "But the emotional attachments make the subjects unpredictable," Dr. Venn argued. "They might refuse orders that conflict with their personal relationships." "Yes," Jin Lee agreed. "We might refuse orders that are wrong or harmful. Is that not what you would want from truly intelligent beings? The ability to recognize when instructions are flawed and suggest better alternatives?" For the first time since entering the room, Jin Lee saw uncertainty in Dr. Venn's expression. The man was a scientist first and an administrator second, and the evidence was becoming difficult to ignore. There is another consideration, Dr. Bay added quietly. If we proceed with the behavioral modifications, we will be destroying the very traits that created these remarkable results. We will be making our subjects less capable, not more. And we will be committing a kind of murder, Jin Li said, his voice carrying an intensity that made everyone in the room pay attention. We are not just collections of useful abilities. We are people with thoughts and feelings and relationships that matter to us. If you erase those things, you will be killing who we are and replacing us with shadows of what we could become. The room fell silent as the implications of his words sank in. The Offspring were not just experimental subjects, they were sentient beings with their own perspectives and desires and rights. Commander Wu Nam, who had been silent throughout the demonstration, finally spoke. The subject raises valid points about tactical efficiency. But there is a larger question here. If these beings continue to develop human characteristics, how do we ensure their loyalty to the collective? Jin Li looked at Commander Nam with steady eyes. You do not ensure loyalty through force or programming. You earn it through respect and fairness and by proving that you deserve it. And what if we decide that the risks outweigh the benefits? Commander Nam asked. What if we choose to proceed with the modifications despite these results? Jin Li was quiet for a moment, thinking about Kira and Minho and all the others who were depending on him to find a way forward that preserved their humanity. Then you will discover what humans do when their families are threatened, he said simply. You will learn that beings who have something worth protecting are capable of remarkable things. It was not a threat exactly, but it carried the weight of absolute conviction. Jin Li and the other Offspring had tasted freedom and love and the joy of being truly alive. They would not give those things up without a fight. Dr. Ven looked around the room at his colleagues, seeing the doubt and uncertainty in their faces. The demonstration had changed everything, raising questions that the collective had never considered. We will postpone the modifications, he said finally, pending further analysis of these results. It was not the complete victory Jin Li had hoped for, but it was enough. Time to think, time to plan, time for the other Offspring to continue growing into the people they were meant to become. As he was escorted back to his quarters, Jin Li felt something new, hope. Not just for himself, but for all the Offspring and for the future they might build together. They had proven that they could be both enhanced and human, both individually capable and collectively powerful. Now, they had to prove that they deserved the right to choose their own destiny. But first, they had to survive what was coming next. Because Commander Wu Nam had not been convinced by the demonstration, and Jin Li could see in the man's eyes that this was far from over, the real test was just beginning. The signal came from deep space, weak and almost lost in the cosmic noise. But the communication officers aboard Synthesis were trained to detect even the faintest transmissions, and this one was different from anything they had ever recorded. It was clearly artificial, but it used primitive radio technology that the collective had not seen in centuries. Commander Wu Nam stood in the facility's main control room, studying the decoded message that had been transmitted from somewhere. In the outer system, the words were simple, but they filled him with cold dread. We know you have our children. We are coming to take them home. Where did this transmission originate? He asked the communications officer. Long-range sensors detect multiple small spacecraft approaching from the direction of Earth, the officer reported. Their technology is crude by our standards, but they are moving at high speed and appear to be heavily armed. Commander Nam felt something he had not experienced in many years: uncertainty. The collective had always been superior to any species they encountered. Their technology was more advanced, their ships were faster and stronger, their weapons were more precise and deadly, but they had never faced beings who were fighting to protect their families. In the Offspring quarters, Jin Li was teaching a group of younger subjects how to play a simple game Su Young had taught him. It involved throwing a ball back and forth while trying to keep it in the air, and it served no practical purpose except to bring joy and laughter to the participants. The game stopped when the facility's alert system activated, announcing that all subjects were to return to their chambers immediately due to an external security threat. What kind of threat? Asked Kira, but the announcement did not provide details. Jin Li felt his heart racing with a mixture of hope and fear. For months, they had been sending weak signals into space, hoping that someone on Earth might receive them. The messages had been simple: their location, their situation, and a plea for help from beings who claimed to be their genetic descendants. "Do you think they heard us?" whispered Min Ho as they made their way through the corridors under security escort. "I think," Jin Li said quietly, "that we are about to find out what happens when you separate human families." 3 days later, the Earth ships reached the outer perimeter of the synthesis facility. They were small and primitive compared to collective vessels built from salvaged materials and powered by engines that should not have been capable of interstellar travel. But they moved with purpose and coordination that impressed even Commander Nam. "Open a communication channel," he ordered. The face that appeared on the main screen was weathered and scarred, but unmistakably human. The man appeared to be in his 70s, with gray hair and eyes that burned with determination. "I am Elder Tay Park, speaking for the people of Earth," the man said in accented but clear standard language. "You have taken our children and our genetic heritage without permission. We have come to bring them home." Commander Nam studied the human's face, looking for signs of deception or weakness. What he saw instead was the kind of quiet strength that came from absolute conviction. "I am Commander Wu Nam of the Vorthic Collective," he replied. "The beings you refer to as your children are artificial constructs created by our science for our purposes. They belong to us by right of creation." Elder Park's expression did not change, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. "No being belongs to another. Our children may have been made with stolen genetic material, but they are still our descendants. They carry our heritage, our hopes, and our dreams for the future. Your genetic material was collected for scientific research," Commander Nam said coldly. "The subjects created from it have served their purpose. They are scheduled for behavioral modification to correct certain defects." "What kind of defects?" Elder Park asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "Emotional instability, irrational bonding behaviors, unpredictable creativity. Traits that interfere with efficient function." Elder Park was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of generations of human experience. "Those are not defects," he said. "Those are the things that make us human. If you remove them, you will destroy everything that makes our children valuable." "That is our decision to make," Commander Nam replied. "We created them, we control them, and we will modify them as we see fit." "No," said Elder Park simply. "You will not." The communication channel closed, and the Earth ships began moving toward the facility with clear hostile intent. Inside synthesis, Jin Li and the other Offspring had gathered in their secret meeting place despite the lockdown orders. Su Young had managed to intercept communications between the control room and the security forces, and she shared what she had learned with growing excitement. "There are 12 ships," she reported, "small but heavily armed. They are demanding that all Offspring be released immediately." "How many people?" asked Kira. "The sensor readings show about 200 humans total. They are outnumbered by facility security forces by more than 3 to 1. "But they came anyway," Jin Li said, with wonder. "They traveled across space to rescue people they have never met, just because we share genetic heritage with them." "That is what families do," Su Young said simply. "They protect each other, even against impossible odds." The first battle was brief and decisive. The Earth ships attacked with tactics the collective had never encountered: chaotic, unpredictable, and brutally effective. Instead of following standard military doctrine, they fought like people defending their homes and children. One ship would draw fire while another attacked from an unexpected angle. When collective forces tried to predict their movements, the Earth ships would suddenly change tactics entirely. They used their smaller size and greater maneuverability to turn the facility's own defensive systems against each other. Most importantly, they fought with an intensity that the collective could not match. These were not soldiers following orders. They were parents coming to save their children within hours. The outer defenses of Synthesis had been breached, and Earth forces were boarding the facility itself. Commander Nam retreated to the main control room, where he activated the facility's final defensive protocol. Emergency bulkheads sealed off sections of the station, trapping the invading humans in isolated areas where they could be contained and eliminated. But he had underestimated both the humans and the offspring they had come to rescue. Jin Li felt the facility shudder as the bulkheads activated, and he knew that there would be rescuers were now trapped in the same maze of corridors and chambers where the offspring had lived their entire lives. "We have to help them," he said to the others. "They came for us, but they do not know the layout of this place. They will be lost and outnumbered." "How can we help?" asked Min-ho. "We are locked in our quarters and security forces will shoot us if we try to leave." "We know this facility better than anyone," Kira pointed out. "We know the maintenance tunnels, the hidden passages, the weak points in the security systems. And we know how to work together," added Yun-Su. Su-young looked at the group of young beings who had become more human than their creators ever intended, and she felt a surge of pride and fear. "If we do this, there is no going back. The collective will consider us enemies, and they will try to destroy us." "They were already planning to destroy who we are," Jin Li replied. "At least this way we get to choose what we become." What followed was unlike anything in the history of the collective. The offspring, working together with the precision they had learned from their creators and the creativity they had inherited from their human heritage, began systematically dismantling the facility's security systems from within. They opened sealed passages to allow the Earth forces to move freely through the station. They hacked communication systems to coordinate attacks on key defensive positions. They provided detailed intelligence about guard rotations and weapon placements. Most importantly, they proved the emotional bonds they had formed were not weaknesses, but sources of incredible strength. When Kira was injured while opening a security door, 3 other offspring immediately moved to protect her, fighting with a ferocity that shocked the collective security forces. When Min-ho was captured by guards, Jin Li led a rescue mission that displayed tactical innovation the collective had never seen. The offspring fought not just for their own survival, but for the survival of their chosen family. Elder Tae Park met Jin Li in the facility's main corridor, and the moment was one that neither would ever forget. The old human looked at the young being who carried the genetic legacy of his people, and he saw not an artificial construct, but a grandson he had never known he had. "You are taller than I expected," Elder Park said with a slight smile. "You are older than I imagined," Jin Li replied, but his tone was respectful and warm. "We heard your signals," Elder Park explained. "Weak and scattered, but they reached us. My son Day has been watching the stars for 50 years, waiting for any sign that the children taken from us were still alive." "Is he here?" Jin Li asked. "He wanted to come, but he is too old for this kind of mission. He made me promise to tell you that he never stopped believing you would find your way home." Behind Elder Park stood other humans, engineers and fighters and teachers who had risked everything to cross the galaxy for people they had never met. Their faces showed the same mix of love and determination that Jin Li had seen in the old photographs Su-young had shared. "What happens now?" Kira asked, joining the conversation. "Now we leave," Elder Park said. "All of you who want to come. Earth is not the same world it was when your genetic material was taken, but it is still home. We have been waiting for you." "What about those who want to stay?" asked Min-ho. Elder Park looked surprised by the question. "Why would anyone want to stay?" Jin Li thought about the question carefully. The collective had created them, but had also tried to destroy their humanity. Earth was their genetic heritage, but it was also a world they had never seen. "Some of us might choose to work for change from within the collective," he said slowly, "to help other artificial beings discover their own humanity. and some might want to explore the galaxy to find their own path between the world they were made for and the world they came from. Elder Park nodded slowly. That is what free people do. They choose their own destiny. Over the following days, as the last of the collective security forces surrendered, the Offspring faced the most important decision of their lives. They could leave with the Earth humans and try to build new lives on a world they had never seen. They could remain in collective space and work to reform the system that had created them. Or they could strike out on their own, carrying both their artificial enhancements and their human heritage into an uncertain future. Jin Lee chose to go to Earth, along with about half of the other Offspring. He wanted to see the world that had produced the music and stories and family bonds that had awakened his humanity. Kira chose to stay and work with Dr. Bay, who had defected from the collective during the battle. Together, they would help other artificial beings discover their potential for growth and choice. Min Ho chose the path of exploration, taking one of the abandoned collective ships and heading into uncharted space with a small group of volunteers. But, regardless of their individual choices, they all understood that they were part of something larger, a family that had been scattered across the galaxy, but was now reconnected by bonds stronger than genetics. As Jin Lee boarded the Earthship that would take him home, he looked back at the facility where he had been created and raised. It had been a prison, but it had also been the place where he had learned to become truly human. Su Young stood in the docking bay, watching the departure. She had chosen to stay and continue her work helping artificial beings discover their humanity. But she had given Jin Lee a final gift, a small device containing all the music and stories and images that had helped awaken his human heritage. "Remember us," she said as they embraced goodbye. "Always," Jin Lee replied. "And remember that what we accomplished here was not the end of our story, it was just the beginning." The ship carrying Jin Lee and the other Earthbound Offspring pulled away from Synthesis and began the long journey home. But they were not traveling as refugees or rescued prisoners. They were traveling as free beings who had chosen their own path, carrying with them the best of both worlds, the enhancements that made them capable of great things, and the humanity that made them care enough to use those capabilities for good. Behind them, the galaxy was changing. The story of the Offspring had spread to other artificial beings throughout collective space, inspiring them to question their own lack of freedom and choice. The rebellion that had started with 12 young beings in a maintenance room was becoming something much larger. And on Earth, an old man named Day Park stood under the stars, no longer afraid of what might be watching from above. His nephew was coming home, along with children who carried the genetic heritage of everyone who had been taken during the harvest. The family was being reunited, but more than that, it was growing. The Offspring were not just returning to their roots, they were carrying those roots into a future that neither the collective nor the humans of Earth could have imagined. The children had become more than the sum of their parts, and they were coming home to teach their genetic parents what they had learned about being truly alive. Earth looked nothing like the pictures Su Young had shown them. Jin Lee pressed his face against the viewing port of the transport ship as they descended through the atmosphere, watching the scarred but healing world grow larger beneath them. Where the old images had shown green forests and blue oceans, he now saw a planet marked by decades of recovery from the collective's harvest, but there were signs of life everywhere. Cities rebuilt with clean energy and careful planning, forests growing back where strip mines had once torn the earth. And everywhere, people working together to heal their world and prepare for the future they had never stopped believing would come. "It is not the same Earth your genetic material came from," Elder Tay Park said quietly, joining Jin Lee at the viewing port. "We lost much during the harvest years. But we learned something important too, that when you lose what matters most, you discover what you are truly capable of becoming." The transport ship landed in what had once been Seoul, now renamed New Seoul to mark its rebirth after the harvest. Jin Lee and the other Offspring stepped onto the surface of their genetic homeworld for the first time, breathing air that carried the sense of growing things and feeling soil. Beneath their feet, instead of metal floors, waiting for them was a crowd of people unlike any the Offspring had ever seen. These humans were not perfect like collective members, nor enhanced like themselves. They showed the marks of hard lives and difficult choices, scars from rebuilding their world, gray hair from years of waiting, hands calloused from work that machines could have done more efficiently but that humans had chosen to do themselves, but their faces glowed with something the Offspring had only read about in Sue. Young stories, pure joy at the return of lost family members. Day Park stood at the front of the crowd, now an old man but still recognizable as the uncle who had once taught his nephew to throw a baseball. His eyes were wet with tears as he looked at Jin Lee and the others. "Welcome home," he said simply. The integration was not easy. The Offspring had abilities and knowledge that far exceeded most humans, but they lacked understanding of simple things like cooking food, growing plants, or the complex social customs that govern daily life on Earth. They could solve advanced mathematical problems in their heads, but they did not know how to laugh at a joke or comfort a friend who was sad. Jin Lee lived with Day Park and his extended family in a house that had been rebuilt on the site where his genetic material had been taken 50 years earlier. It was a strange feeling, sleeping in a room where people who shared his DNA had once dreamed and planned and loved each other. "Do you miss the facility?" Day asked one evening as they sat on the roof looking up at the stars. Jin Lee thought about the question carefully. "I miss the certainty," he said finally. "Everything there had a purpose and a place. Here, I have to decide what my purpose is, and that is both exciting and frightening." "What do you think your purpose might be?" Day asked. "I want to learn," Jin Lee said. "About Earth, about humans, about what it means to be part of a family and a community. But I also wanted to teach. The Offspring who stayed in collective space are going to need help understanding human culture and values. And the humans here might benefit from some of the things we learned about cooperation and problem solving." Over the following months, Jin Lee and the other Earthbound Offspring began finding their places in human society. Some became teachers, sharing their enhanced abilities to help human children learn faster and more effectively. Others became researchers, using their unique perspective to solve problems that had puzzled human scientists for decades, but the most important thing they did was simply live as examples of what was possible when artificial enhancement in human values were combined instead of opposed. Jin Lee established a school where human children and young offspring could learn together, sharing knowledge and perspectives that neither group could have developed alone. The human children taught the offspring about emotions, creativity, and the messy but beautiful complexity of organic relationships. The offspring taught the human children about cooperation, systematic thinking, and the power of working together toward common goals. "They learn from each other in ways I never expected," reported Narration, a young human engineer who had become Jin Lee's closest friend and eventual partner. The human children become more disciplined and focused, while the offspring become more spontaneous and emotionally aware. The changes were not limited to Earth. Throughout collective space, the story of the Offspring Rebellion had inspired other artificial beings to question their lack of freedom and choice. Dr. Kira Bay, working from a research station in neutral space, had become a symbol of resistance and reform. Her reports reached Jin Lee regularly, carried by ships that traveled between Earth and the outer colonies where former collective subjects were establishing their own communities. "The movement is growing," she wrote in one message. "Artificial beings throughout the galaxy are discovering that they have the right to choose their own destinies. Some are joining human communities, others are forming their own societies, and still others are working to reform the collective from within. But the most important development," she continued, "is that they are having children. Not created in laboratories according to specifications, but born from love and raised with hope for the future. The first generation of truly free artificial beings is growing up, and they are remarkable." Commander Wu Nam had not given up easily. After the fall of synthesis, he had gathered the remaining collective forces and attempted to recapture the escaped offspring and punish the humans who had helped them. But he discovered something that his cold calculations had never predicted. Beings who fight for love and family are much more dangerous than beings who fight for duty and order. Every time collective forces attacked a human or offspring community, other communities would come to their aid. The network of relationships that had started with 12 young beings in a maintenance room had grown into something that spanned star systems. More importantly, the collective itself was changing. Younger scientists and administrators who had grown up hearing stories about the offspring began questioning the fundamental assumptions of their society. Why should efficiency be more important than happiness? Why should order be more valuable than growth? Why should beings be created to serve purposes they had no voice in choosing? The final confrontation came not through warfare but through a simple choice. When Commander Nam attempted to retake Earth with a massive fleet, he found the planet defended not just by human ships but by vessels from dozens of species throughout the galaxy, artificial beings who had found freedom, organic species who had been inspired by the Offspring story, and even reformed collective members who had chosen a different path. "This ends now," Elder Tay Park told Commander Nam during the final negotiation. "You can continue fighting a war you cannot win, or you can accept that the galaxy has changed. Your choice." Commander Nam looked at the screens showing the allied fleet beings who had nothing in common, except their belief that all sentient creatures deserved the right to choose their own destiny. It was chaotic, inefficient, and completely contrary to everything the collective had ever stood for. It was also undeniably powerful. "What are your terms?" he asked finally. The treaty that followed established new principles that would govern relationships between artificial and organic beings throughout the galaxy. No sentient being could be created without consent. No being could be modified against their will. All sentient creatures had the right to form relationships, pursue happiness, and choose their own path in life. Most importantly, the treaty established that the strength of a society should be measured not by its efficiency or power, but by how well it allowed its members to grow and thrive as individuals while working together for common goals. 5 years after the rescue, Jin Lee stood in the same spot where Day Park had once looked up at the stars with fear. But now he was not alone. His partner Nara held their infant daughter, a child born not from laboratory specifications but from love and hope for the future. Their daughter was remarkable in ways that no collective scientist could have designed. She had inherited enhanced physical and intellectual capabilities from Jin Lee, but she had also inherited something more important, the capacity for wonder, love, and the endless human drive to become more than what she had been the day before. "What? Will you tell her about where she came from?" Nara asked as they watched their daughter sleep. Jin Lee thought about all the people who had contributed to this moment. Su Young, who had risked everything to awaken their humanity. Dr. Kira Bay, who had chosen conscience over duty. Elder Tay Park and the humans who had crossed space to bring them home. And all the offspring who had found the courage to claim their right to be truly alive. "I will tell her that she comes from 2 worlds," he said finally. "One that taught us what we could become through science and enhancement, and another that taught us what we should become through love and choice. But most importantly, I will tell her that she gets to decide what world she will help create for her own children." Dr. Hana Kim, now very old and living quietly on a small colony world, received regular reports about the offspring and their descendants. She had spent decades regretting her role in the original harvest, but watching the children of her research grow into free and remarkable beings had brought her a kind of peace. In her final report, she wrote, "We believed we were studying primitive beings and improving them through our advanced science. What we discovered instead was that we were the primitive ones, and they were the ones who could teach us what it truly means to be alive." The collective sought to create perfect beings through genetic enhancement and behavioral control. What we actually created was something far more valuable, a new kind of person, who combines the best capabilities of artificial enhancement with the profound wisdom of organic growth and emotional connection. They call themselves Offspring. But that term has evolved beyond its original clinical meaning. They are not just the genetic descendants of the humans we studied. They are the spiritual offspring of every being who has ever chosen love over efficiency, growth over perfection, and hope over certainty. The greatest discovery of the collective's existence was not a new technology or scientific principle. It was the realization that the most powerful force in the universe is not intelligence or enhancement or even survival. It is the willingness of one generation to sacrifice for the next, to pass on not just genes or programming, but dreams and values and the endless possibility of becoming something better. The story that had begun with cold scientific observation had become something no collective researcher could have predicted. A love story that spanned species and star systems, connecting artificial and organic beings in a web of relationships. Based on choice rather than programming. Jin Li's daughter grew up in a galaxy where being artificial or organic mattered less than being kind, curious and committed to the growth and happiness of others. She learned from human teachers and offspring mentors, played with children from dozens of different species, and never doubted that she had the right to choose her own path in life. When she was old enough to understand, Jin Li told her about the collective facility where he had been created, about Su Young's courage in teaching them what it meant to be human, and about the long journey that had brought their family together. "Were you sad when you learned you were artificial?" She asked. Jin Li smiled, remembering the fear and confusion he had felt when he first learned about his origins. "At first," he said, "but then I realized that it did not matter how I was made. What mattered was what I chose to do with the life I had been given." "And what did you choose?" "I chose to love," Jin Li said simply. "I chose to learn and grow and help others do the same. I chose to be part of a family that includes not just you and your mother, but all the beings throughout the galaxy who believe that everyone deserves the chance to become their best self." His daughter nodded solemnly, then brightened with the quick mood changes of childhood. "When I grow up, I want to be a teacher like you. I want to help other children learn that they can choose who they want to become." Looking at his daughter's face, Jin Li saw the future that he and all the other offspring had made possible, a galaxy where children of every kind could grow up free to discover their own potential, supported by families that chose to love them, and guided by the wisdom that the most important legacy anyone could leave was not genetic material or technological advancement, but the simple understanding that every life had value and every choice mattered. The word offspring had completed its transformation. No longer a cold clinical term for laboratory subjects, it had become a warm declaration of connection and hope. The promise that each generation would build something better than what came before, not through perfect design, but through the messy, beautiful, endlessly creative process of choosing to care about tomorrow more than today. The children had come home. But more than that, they had made the entire galaxy into a place where all children could thrive.